Now, we're very fortunate that we'll start off today with a story. Um, Medication harm happens to real people, to loved ones, and we should never lose sight of that. We are honored to have Dr. Kapoor, a clinician and a family member, to tell us of his family's experiences and some strategies on how to prevent future harm. So, I'll hand over slides to you, and
Perfect.
it's all yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Hamilton. The initial title for this talk was Strategies to Mitigate Toxicity from Fluoropyrimidines. However, I've been a bit more ambitious and elected to provide strategies that could potentially eliminate death from fluoropyrimidines. I wish to thank the staff at ISMP Canada for including me. These are my affiliations and credentials. I'm the brother of Dr. Anil Kapoor, no financial relationships. I would like to point out that ISMP has produced an excellent document on this subject, and I encourage you to go to their website to review their document that they have produced on this same subject. This is the outline of our talk today, and I'll begin the talk with some questions. What if I told you that I was giving you a drug that had a risk of death of 1 in 500, would you be concerned with the risk of death of that drug? What if I did not tell you that there were 5 ways to significantly reduce your risk of death from 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000 or less? Would it bother you? What if I told you that a test to mitigate this death was very cheap, between $50 to $300? Let me share you one of the 5 ways to reduce risk of death of this drug. What if I told you that you could have a genetic variant in your enzyme that's supposed to break down the drug that's really present in 2 to 8% of the population that would increase your risk of dying from this drug to as high as 1 in 30, depending upon the variant you have? What if I told you that doing a simple blood test would reduce your risk of death significantly? So just to illustrate this graphically, with no screening test in the general population, your risk of death is about 1 in 500 from this drug. Given the screening test, your risk would reduce to 1 in 1,000. However, if you are one of those people, the 2 to 8% of the population who has a genetic variant in this enzyme, your risk of death is 1 in 30. And you'll see that with the screening test, your risk goes down to 1 in 1,000. What if you or a loved one died from this drug and no one told you any of this information in these past slides? Well, this happens to about 1,300 people a year in the US, and by extrapolation, about 130 people in Canada. And here are some of the people who have passed away in this manner, one of which was my own brother, Dr. Anil Kapoor. My brother was a world-renowned urologist, renal transplant surgeon, uro-oncologist, full professor at McMaster University. My brother was a renowned expert. He was a gifted surgeon. He was an internationally sought-after speaker. He was a son. He was a brother. He was a father. He was a partner. He had many friends. And just to show his personality, he was a very humble individual. Here he is in his final tweet honoring the cleaner who worked at his hospital where he worked. Here is the final days of my brother. My brother had a colonoscopy on January 14th. He had a diagnosis of colon cancer, which very much surprised him. He had a CT scan on the 20th to show how functional he was. He went to a basketball game on the 21st. He had an oncology appointment on the 26th. This is the weekend before starting his chemotherapy infusion. Here he is at the hospital. Here are his final days. He began his chemotherapy on the 6th of February. Overdose signs and symptoms presented on the 10th within 96 hours. He proceeded to the emergency room on the 12th, again within 96 hours. He proceeded to the emergency room again on the 16th. This time he was admitted to the ICU shortly thereafter. He was intubated, and he passed away within 22 days of starting the chemotherapy. This is repeated over and over. If you review charts, of people who have passed away in this manner. All of us are physicians, and we did not know at all what happened to our brother and how he died. Again, this is repeated all over the world again and again. We got to know what happened until a phone call from the oncologist about 2 months later, which I'll address later. So the drug, as you guessed, is 5-FU or fluorouracil in the IV form, and the pill form is capecitabine. Together, these two drugs are classified as fluoropyrimidines, and they're used, as you know, in head and neck cancers, breast cancer, and gastrointestinal cancers. We all have a DPYD gene that breaks down this drug, and if we have some variants in this, we will accumulate toxic metabolites that can be life-threatening and unable to excrete the drug, and it can kill us. How easy would it have been to save these lives? The next slides begin with just one of the 5, and I'll address all of them. So before being given the drug, you would take a blood test. You would determine if you have a variant in your DPYD gene. You would then go to this table if you have a variant, and you would adjust the dose accordingly. Instead of being given a full dose of 5-FU or capecitabine, you would adjust it based on this table and reduce the dose. This is very simple and easy to do. In fact, in certain jurisdictions now, as of 2026, we are pre-testing. The leaders, however, in this are in Europe, and since 2020, they have been testing people before being given a fluoropyrimidine, with France legislating this. Australia just recently came online. In North America, we will see that previously Canada was somewhat ahead of the US, but it's flipped, and the US seems to be surging ahead now. I will explain this. Previously in 2023, the only state that legislated and still does legislate is Louisiana to do DPYD testing, predominantly from 1 or 2 people who have led this. However, as of 2026, there are some changes that have led to rapid adoption of DPYD testing throughout the United States. In Canada, this document provides an outline of who provides testing in Canada. I've just updated this. It looks like as of December, Alberta has come online. However, still Manitoba, the territories, and the Maritimes appear to be still, some of them are not covering or doing DPYD testing prior to giving fluoropyrimidines. So why was Europe ahead of Canada and the USA? I'll provide some history. So this is predominantly due to these guidelines, the NCCN guidelines. These guidelines that did not recommend pre-testing for DPYD up until April of 2025, excuse me. And these guidelines are important, even though they're American, because to a degree, the whole world does refer to them as for guidance. This has been substantiated by this paper published in Bulgaria, which shows how much they rely on these guidelines. There are since the 1980s, there have been about 1,500 papers in this particular subject. However, the guidelines cited only 1.3%. We have no idea how they selected these papers. The chair is selected by the senior staff. The chair selects its members. There's no term limit to the chair, and the committee members have no term limit, the people who generate these guidelines. With the exception of randomized controlled trials, level of evidence is based on a vote of the committee. The chair basically chooses his committee members, where they sit on for unlimited times, and they get to arbitrarily select what papers they want to cite as a basis, and the level of evidence is based on a vote count. I believe this picture speaks for itself. In fact, these guidelines were analyzed by this Canadian paper, where they analyzed global guidelines. They found that the NCCN guidelines have no analytical framework and have very low score in terms of rigor of development. Nonetheless, they had a hold on the whole United States. Until the FDA came and made some changes. In October 3rd, 2025, not too many months ago, they ordered that testing be done before being given fluoropyrimidines, mainly the oral form. The IV form, I'm sure, is coming. To their credit, the NCCN did follow suit on October 30th, including the oral and IV form, indicating that testing should be done before being given these fluoropyrimidines. In Canada, our statement in Health Canada is still very tepid and says testing should be considered. But doctor, my brother was tested, so why did he not survive? Well, because the test only included 5 alleles prevalent in Northern and Western European populations. This was his allele variant. This allele, however, was published in literature by the Dutch in 2008, who are leaders in this field. Again, it was published in 2020, and again in 2024. In fact, it is not only my brother who was skipped, but more than 60% of the Canadian population would be skipped if we just use the traditional allele testing. In Ontario, at least, they seem to acknowledge this, but there's really no action taken. And deaths continue to occur. This is Christopher, who also passed away at the same institution as my brother. And sadly, he was cured of his cancer given adjuvant capecitabine, and he died again within 17 days. There was an update in Ontario in September 5th. However, it wouldn't have still affected these lives. But the US are acting very quickly. This variant has been included in a number of testing centers throughout the United States. I want to go back to the phone call from the oncologist that was received 2 months after my brother died. He indicated that my brother's variant was very rare, 0.00001. That's 4 zeros and then a 1. However, the database on which this is built, in fact, has very few South Asians in it. Only 60,000 South Asians, but over 1 million people of European ethnicity. Of course, the denominator is very low. But there are at least 1.5 billion people of South Asian ethnicity. So only 0.004% of the South Asian population is included in the genome database. If you don't look for it, you won't find it. So what are the solutions? I'll get to these solutions. The solutions are, number one, is to consider sequencing the full DPYD genome. And this is being done at US and Canadian and some Canadian centers, including Europe. It's a phenotype test called Uracell, and these are both, combining them would be very cheap. Dr. Brooks in Dartmouth College, Hanover, New Hampshire, does sequence the full DPYD gene there for all his patients. Another key solution is therapeutic drug monitoring, which has been recommended to be done for 5-FU infusion. And this has now been approved by Health Canada as of 2024, and some Canadian centers are testing this. The other solution to prevent death is there is an antidote. The antidote is called Vistagard and has been available since 2015. It is available by special access, but if you follow these very simple steps, you can get it within 24 hours. Is the patient very sick very early? Is it within 96 hours? If yes, make 3 phone calls. This lecture will be available after, and this is the key slide, which the 3 phone calls, you may have tested this after hours, and it does work. If every operating room can carry dantrolene, which is a antidote to malignant hyperthermia, which has a risk of 1 in 100,000, surely we can have the antidote for something that kills 1 in 500. Can one person lead change? Well, yes, they can. Any one of you can lead change at your center. This is Colette with her husband. With her permission, she wanted me to show these slides of what this drug does to people with DPYD deficiency. And this is what happened to my brother very quickly, what it does to you. Not just kills you, but leads to excessive suffering. Colette led change in Quebec and transformed Quebec to do DPYD testing. She was initiated the first province to do this. Here's another change agent, Lindsay. This is Lindsay's mother, Carol. She died at Dana-Farber. She was not tested. Lindsay led change in this whole institution. This is Karen and her husband, Larry. He also was not tested. Again, he was given capecitabine as adjuvant. He she led change and transformed Mass General. However, this is Ken. Ken has formed this organization after the loss of his wife, Advocates for Universal DPYD Testing. But the current approach is not working. The current approach to fixing this problem, which involves killing people and then testing later, is not the way to solve this problem. Patients and clinicians need to know what is going on. They need to communicate the risk of these drugs. In summary, in conclusion, we should stop all fatalities from fluoropyrimidine exposure. And the key approaches are these 5 methods: gene sequencing, uracil phenotype testing, have the antidote, recognition and communication, and drug level monitoring. There's no excuse. We can easily prevent death from fluoropyrimidines. We should recognize the diversity of populations, and one person can lead change. I leave you with a quote from this poem from my brother that he liked very much. This talk is dedicated to my brother. Thank you very much to all those who assisted.
Thank you, Dr. Kapoor, for your family's story, for the willingness to tell it. I think the opportunity to learn from tragedy, certainly your passionate guidance and your frequent reminder, which we need, is that one person or small groups of people can make a difference. So I'm hopeful that everyone will take note of this and continue the work, expand the work. Thank you.
Thank you very much.